Hello and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's review for Defiant, which is episode 9 of season 3 of Star Trek Deep Space Nine. This video is a part of a series of videos where I review episodes of Star Trek as determined by my user polls. This episode did not win my Deep Space Nine user poll. It came in second, but the thing is, the episode that did win my user poll for Deep Space Nine, The Muse, after I made that poll, I actually decided I have other plans for The Muse. So I do apologize for all those who voted for The Muse, which actually did win the user poll, but don't worry, I will be doing a full-length review for The Muse later, but you'll have to wait for that, but it will come. So instead, I decided to review the episode that came in second place on that poll, and that is Defiant. So Defiant is the episode where Will Riker comes on Deep Space Nine, and Kira has a night out with him, and everyone seems to enjoy it, but it turns out it's not really Will Riker. It's his identical duplicate, Tom Riker, who steals the Defiant because he's working with the Maquis and he tries to investigate a shipyard that he believes the Cardassians are building ships to destroy the Maquis. And Cisco works with Dukat and goes to Cardassia to work with the Dukat to hunt him down, and eventually to discover that the Obsidian Order have a hidden base in that sector, so they make a deal with Dukat that Tom Riker will turn over himself and the sensor logs, and that they will return the Defiant and let everyone else go. So, this is a pretty good episode. I think some people overrate it, some people underrate it. It is, of course, an obvious Jonathan Frakes Riker cameo. Ooh, look. It's Riker! And of course, they commercials, promos, and everything played it off as, look, it's Commander Riker. And then once you watch it, you're like, ha ha ha, it's actually not Commander Riker, it's Thomas Riker. Now, Thomas Riker, of course, is a reference to a character who appeared, or first was introduced in the Next Generation 6th season episode Second Chances, where Commander Riker beams down to the planet with an away team from the Enterprise to find there's another version of himself there, because he had visited that planet 8 years ago and there was this weird, bullshit in the atmosphere, blah, 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 blah. And apparently when he beamed up, it created two of him who were both equally William Riker. They both equally have the rights to be called William Riker. The transporter just created duplicates, so there's no original, no copy. They're both entitled to be William Riker. It's just that one was stuck on the planet for 8 years and the other went through Starfleet and became a commander. So the one who was stuck on the planet was finally rescued. He's a lieutenant and he was struggling to make a name for himself and differentiate himself from Commander Riker, so he decided to go by his middle name instead of his first name, Thomas, so he's referred to as Thomas Riker, which this episode kind of speeds through that explanation even faster than I did, so you're kind of screwed if you haven't seen that episode. They're just like, yeah, he's just a duplicate, just go with it. But I will say I'm always a huge fan of Star Trek when they keep up, particularly Next Gen Deep Space Nine era, especially early Deep Space Nine era that didn't do it this much, when they stick to continuity and they continue off of storylines and characters and stuff that's already been established, instead of doing the reset button and having everything reset, which is something that Voyager, I think, is the most guilty of doing. Although original series does it just as much, but it's always worse when Voyager does it, because they would actually benefit by not doing it. But anyway, that's another topic. I do enjoy the fact that we get follow-up on Thomas Riker, and I think it's actually I thought it was a pretty creative storyline, a pretty creative use of Thomas Riker. And why not use Thomas Riker? Because Jonathan Frakes was often directing episodes of DS9, and so he was more than willing to come on board and guest star. And it's always great to have Jonathan Frakes on the screen. It was great getting the interactions between Riker and Kira, even though you find out it's not really William Riker. Really it is, because Thomas Riker and William Riker are basically the same person. They're just splintered off because of their experiences. This is something I recently talked about in my Westworld Season 3 review, and they really took in the concept of, even if you're the exact same person, the same duplicate, if you split up into two different versions, the more time passes, the more different those two different versions will become, just because of experiences, especially if those two different versions are in two totally different places and have totally different situations and totally different experiences, that they could eventually become two totally different people. And so this is something this explores, maybe not as much as it could have, but it is an interesting concept. I mean, there is the problem with this is that it could end up being like the evil twin trope that they did do with Lore in Next Generation. Now, I don't think they quite made it to the evil twin trope, but they were kind of brushing up against that in this episode by making him a Maquis, because when his appearance in Second Chances, he had nothing to do with the Maquis, and the Maquis were never mentioned. So it's kind of something they just invented to make him a bit more evil, where he would still be Defiant. But I think they certainly didn't make him as cliche evil as Lore, and plus they gave him enough traits that were familiar with that Riker would have, that you could buy that this was just a different version of Riker. And as I said, I really enjoyed seeing him and Kira together, although Kira is technically supposed to be in a relationship with Bareil, and yet she has a romance with Thomas. I mean, she even kisses him. I mean, they hang out all night, and she kisses him at the end of this episode. So what about Bareil, Kira? Anyway, he's going to die shortly anyway, so don't worry about him. Anywho, this other storyline we get, actually, I don't like as much. And watching this episode again, I'm like really into it. The first half, we get Riker on DS9, and he steals Defiant. But as soon as he steals the Defiant, I think the episode kind of stops to a screeching halt. Because we then get the storyline about Cisco and Dukat. Now, usually I'm a huge Dukat fan. I love me some Dukat. But I wasn't a fan of him in this episode. Now, there's apparently, and I was just watching in my old review for Waltz and someone else's review for Waltz, and there's this huge debate apparently amongst the DS9 fan base about Dukat and how his character was portrayed and how the writers were kind of inconsistent. Is he evil? Is he not evil? I'm on the side that he is evil, and I don't like portrayals of him, such as this episode, where he's not evil. Because I find it kind of insulting to say that he's not evil, because he was the commandant of a forced labor camp of the entire occupation of Bajor, I believe, where millions of people were tortured and raped and murdered. So let me put it to you this way. What would you think if there was a show where Hitler was a character and they tried to humanize him and show the better side of Hitler? Now, I'm sure Hitler did have he was nice to his pets probably and nice to his wife or whatever. I'm sure he did have a human side. But I don't fucking need to see a story or show or movie about how much of a nice guy Hitler was. I don't give a fuck, because he's a mass murderer. It's the same thing with Dukat. I don't want to see how not much of a nice guy he is, because he's a fucking mass murderer. I don't give a shit. It's like, I'm sorry, you may call me, closed-minded or whatever. I mean, I'm all for nuanced villains And even when he is quote-unquote portrayed as being evil, he's still portrayed as being nuanced. I didn't mind his portrayal in the Maquis. I thought that totally fit his character. And I loved his portrayal in Civil Defense, another episode I reviewed. That just came, I think it was just a couple episodes before this one, where he was he was being all like schwarmy and smug, and I'm going to take the station back. That's the kind of performance of Dukat I love. Here, where he's like talking to Cisco, it's like, oh, my son is, you're supposed to take him out to his birthday, but I can't because I'm here dealing with the Starfleet officer who, is threatening our people. And when my son looks back at this, he's not going to remember that he's not going to look back on this in fondness. He's going to look back in anger because all he's going to think of is that some Starfleet officer prevented me from spending time with my father, and that's sad. You know what I say to you, Dukat? Who gives a fuck about your son? You're a mass murderer. You should be fucking executed. Spend the rest of your life in prison. You shouldn't have a son. Anyway, I'm sorry. Apparently, this is like a staunch debate within DS9 fans, but that is very strongly my stance in the matter. I mean, don't get me wrong. I would think that line about the son would be interesting if it was any other character, but not someone who's portrayed as maniacal and evil. And even people say, oh, they turned him evil in the last 2 seasons. Fuck that. Very first episode of the show, Emissary, they established that he was the Commandant of Bajor. There you go, right there, he's evil. Any portrayal like this goes against that character. And that is my stance, and I am firmly sticking by it. Again, not to say it can't be nuanced, and I do think in some of these later season episodes, maybe not all of them, he was, maybe not Waltz, he was a bit nuanced, even though he was rightfully evil, which is, I think, the better way of portraying him. So I didn't really like that aspect of this episode, and I actually thought the stuff with him and Cisco on Cardassia Prime was kind of boring, if I'm being honest. But I did love the Obsidian Order side of things. And I love so much how this was perfectly setting up for the for Improbable Calls, the Dice Cast 2-parter that comes later in the season, because it has the Obsidian Order Observer, which I just found out was actually played by Captain Garrett. You remember Captain Garrett from yesterday's Enterprise or Next Generation? This is the same actress playing this Cardassian Obsidian Order. Well, she must be a really good actress because I had no idea. I mean, of course, the makeup helps hide who she is, but still, her portrayal as an actor was completely different for this episode, which is what a good actor would do. So anyway, I did like the storyline with the Obsidian Order here. I did think it was interesting how and this is something I think this is the first time we really get sort of the inner conflict between the Obsidian Order and the Central Command. Because these two organizations were established. The Obsidian Order was more recently established just at the end of Season 2, and I think we got Second Skin earlier this season was also furthered it, and this is kind of just like the third time they're mentioned. And so we never got to play with that dynamic between, I guess in Second Skin they played with it a little bit, but here we get to see it like full on command center and how the command structure works, and how the Obsidian Order just is an observer, and she's not meant to have any power. The Obsidian Order aren't meant to have any ships, which, I don't know, kind of contradicts the end of this episode, because clearly they have ships. I mean, they don't even need to look for evidence. They have the evidence that they have ships. That's clear as day, and yet nothing happens. They don't face any consequences, so I don't know how strict that law is that they're not supposed to have any ships, because apparently nothing came of it. But anyway, of course, this whole episode's about Riker thinks there's a shipyard where they're building Cardassian ships to destroy the Maquis, so he goes there to investigate, and all these other Cardassian ships that the Central Command have no control over just appear out of nowhere, and he becomes overwhelmed with too many ships, so he has to surrender. Now, of course, later, and I love how the season never, like, the episodes where they do follow this up on Improbable Calls and the Dies Cast, you kind of have to put it together yourself. And I know a lot of people actually didn't, because you have to remember this episode. Because they don't, like, go, haha, remember, these are the ships that we hinted at in the Defiant. They don't, like, spell it out for you. You kind of have to put it together yourself. There was the only way they fit this together is there's one line in dialogue, and I think it's Improbable Calls, where Nabarantane says we were building a secret fleet for this invasion in the Orions, or the Arias sector. And that's the only hint that they give that this connects back to this, because this is the Arias sector that Riker is going to. So you have to remember the Arias sector from this episode. I love that. I love that they don't talk down to you, and that this is actually, I love the fact that it's going to go over most people's heads. Now, of course, yeah, because all the ships appear out of nowhere, but once you know that, this episode makes more sense, because why are all these Obsidian Order ships appearing out of nowhere? Because they have cloaking devices, because they're working with the Romulan and Tal Shiar to build this giant fleet to attack the Dominion. It's funny that Thomas Riker got wind of this when the Central Command had no idea, but he mistakenly, his intelligence, of course, was bad, because it said it was in, they were going to use it to attack the Maquis, but it had nothing. They had bigger fish to fry than the Maquis. It was being a bit self-centered there. They were going to use it to wipe out the Founders and attack the Dominion, which is a much bigger concern than the petty little Maquis. But, of course, the Obsidian Order, at this stage, of course, they weren't ready to attack, and their fleets probably weren't completely built at this stage. So at this stage, they were just more concerned with protecting the secrecy of that base, and plus the fact that there are Romulans involved. Now I heard, I don't know if this is actually true or accurate, but I heard somewhere that when they wrote this episode, they didn't know what the conclusion would be. And if that's the case, I have to give the writers so much credit and so much congratulations, because this fits. It matches up so perfectly with Improbable Calls and the Dies Cast that I would have thought that they had this planned out all along, because it makes perfect sense. Because otherwise, how would they explain the Cardassian ships just appearing out of nowhere? They're decloaking because they have Romulan cloaking devices. So I think the case is probably, if that's true, they probably looked at the scene and be like, okay, we have to explain this. What explanation could there be? Cloaking device. Where would they get cloaking devices from? The Romulans. Why were they working with the Romulans? Oh, because they wanted to destroy the Dominion. And we'll tie this all together to Garrick's plot, because it's Obsidian Order. Like, some brilliant writing there. I do really praise the writers of Season 3 of Deep Space Nine, which, again, I still say Season 3 of Deep Space Nine is one of the best seasons of Deep Space Nine and the entire Star Trek franchise. I can't believe so many people say they don't like it. I still don't get that. I'm sorry. Or they can say it's on par with seasons 1 and 2. I completely disagree. This is way better than seasons 1 and 2, but that's neither here nor there. So anyway, I did really like how that worked. Now, the Thomas Riker storyline, that also kind of went downhill once he took over the Defiant, because it became this thing with Kira constantly going like, oh, what are you doing? You're acting like a freedom fighter. You're not a freedom fighter. And she's like, you're still up behaving like a Starfleet officer. You're a hero. Terrorists don't get to be heroes. And I'm sorry, but I actually side with Riker in this one. I think Kira's wrong. Which is funny, because she shouldn't be wrong. Because she is a resistance fighter. She doesn't know what it's like to be the fighter. And maybe she's just comparing her experiences. But I think that experienced Starfleet officer would make excellent terrorist. And that, in fact, because the argument Kira makes is that, oh, you're trying to be a hero, terrorists don't get to be heroes. If I were you, I would take the ship and I would destroy all these high value targets, and then I would waylay to these military targets instead of going on this specific stealth mission for this specific shipyards. And I mean, it turns out she's true because Tom Riker's intelligence is false. But if his intelligence wasn't false, and let's just put this aside, let's assume that it wasn't false, he would be completely in the right. Like, to go off and just randomly just wreak havoc and destruction, that's just going to result in further consequences for the demilitarized zone. I mean, Dukat laid this out at the start of the episode, that the Central Command will send a fleet to the demilitarized zone to use this as an excuse to wipe out the Maquis. So if he just went around like willy-nilly destroying stuff, that's exactly what they would do, and the Federation would not be able to stop him. But if they use it as a specific stealth mission to cripple to stop them from wiping out the Maquis, which is what they thought it was going to do anyway, that's actually a much smarter use of the Defiant. Either that or keeping the Defiant in the demilitarized zone to take on this fleet, although, I don't know, one ship against the fleet, even if it's Defiant, kind of odd. So I think this is the best use of the Defiant, and I think Thomas Riker actually had it right and Kira was wrong. Just my opinion. Anyway, Ronald D. Moore talked about how he had this idea for a while to make Thomas Riker a member of the Maquis. In fact, he said the original idea was to have the Maquis were actually getting better and better and better and more destructive, and they were trying to figure out why, and then they found out that Riker was their general, and oh, that's why. And actually, that sounds like a better idea. Actually, I wish they would have went that way instead of what, I mean, they kind of did this later on with Eddington, but I didn't like that. I had a lot of issues with that. I'll get to that in the other episodes. But Eddington, they just made him the leader of the Maquis, like, all of a sudden it would make no sense. And plus, he was like a low-grade security chief, lieutenant commander. Who cares about Eddington? But if you put Riker, even though it's not William, still, it is a version of William. You put a version of William Riker, even though he has a bit less experience, he's still Riker. You put him in charge of the Maquis, and fuck yeah, man, they would wreak a lot of havoc. And I think that would have been a much better use, personally. Also, a side note, another thing I just found out, is that the actress, and apparently it's the same character, who appeared in this episode, also appeared in Preemptive Strike, who was I can't even remember her name, but she was the Maquis person who was like with Lieutenant Rowe when she was undercover. But she had a lot more to do in that other episode. I had no idea it was the same person. In fact, I remember thinking, oh, this person looks just like the person from Preemptive Strike, or they have just a generic Maquis person. But no, it looks like her because it is her. It's the same character. I was like, I had no idea. And I wish they would have given her more to do if that was the case. Now, of course, I gotta get into what I think this episode's biggest fault is. It ends with Kira saying, oh, we'll get you out of there, Tom. We will get you out, I promise you that. And then we never hear or see of Tom Riker ever again. And even like at the time, our Stephen Bear was quoted as saying, oh, we can definitely follow up on this because we have use of Jonathan Frakes. He's always nearby. Riker's ours. We're definitely going to follow up on this. I don't know what happened, but something happened. I have no idea who. Rick Berman would be my guess, or even other producers or people high ups in Deep Space Nine, but someone put out a directive. I doubt it was Iron or Stephen Bear after that quote. It does make me, if he said that quote, it does make me sound like his hand was forced. But someone put out a directive to not pitch any Tom Riker stories, that any future Tom Riker stories would be rejected outright. Why? Why? Why did they decide to abandon this? It makes no sense. This was right there for the taking. I mean, following up on Tom Riker would have been way more interesting than that stupid Eddington bullshit. and a lot of other bullshit that they did in season 5. Like, and instead of having Klingons and whatnot, let's see more of Tom Riker. But whatever. There's some, I do think it hurts this episode, and I talked about this in other reviews. I do, that continuity matters, and if there's something that should be followed up on, and if they do follow up on later on, like Kalar, for example, then it makes it great. It makes it even better. It should be followed up on. But if they don't follow up on it, like Jeremy Astor from The Bonding, then it makes it worse. Because they fucking should follow up on it. I think this is definitely the case with Thomas Riker. So I definitely think it hurts this episode that they never followed up on this. Now, there was some non-canon material that did follow up on what happened to Thomas Riker. I believe William Shatner, in one of his stupid books where Kirk was this invincible resurrected Borg bullshit. I don't know. Those books are so stupid. I think Thomas Riker was in one of them, if I remember correctly, but I don't even remember. I think he was like the evil twin type. And there was also Peter David did Imzadi 2, where Thomas Riker had this whole section where he was in prison with the Romulan. The Romulan guy helped him break out of prison, and then he went out looking for Troy and found that she was with Worf, and he got all jealous and turned into like the evil stalker type. See, both those examples did turn Thomas Riker into the evil twin stereotype that lore was, and that's why they're not good. And Thomas Riker works in this episode because they kind of avoid that. They skirt that, but they avoid it entirely. So I would have liked to see Thomas Riker reappear in actual canon and not be an evil stereotype, but I do believe it is too late for that, unfortunately. It would have been nice to find out whatever became of him, but honestly, I would be more interested to find out whatever happened to Ensign Rowe, which is another thing that a lot of non-canon material got into, but we never got an answer in canon, because last we saw she went to the Maquis, but then the Maquis got wiped out, so whatever happened to her, but that's, I guess that's a story for another time, as Mas Kamada would say. Anyway, so I think that ending that kind of hurts that episode. Anyway, so my rating for Defiant out of 10, I'm gonna give this a 7. It's teetering between the 7 and 8, but I think I'll actually go more with the 7. Very good, because of the Dukat stuff. I didn't think was the best, and as I said, I thought the episode the second half of the episode wasn't as good as the stuff with Kira whining, where I actually think she was wrong. And the fact that they never followed up on Thomas Riker, I think that was the clinch. That was the final thing that clinched it, that this doesn't get an 8. Knocks it down to the 7 that they, especially the way he ended it. We're definitely going to get you out, Thomas. And no, we're not. Fuck you. Rot in jail! So that definitely hurts this episode. But I think Jonathan Frakes is great. I think seeing this version of Riker I think it's a great idea to use Thomas in this way. As I said, I love the continuity. I think seeing her with the Deep Space Nine characters, particularly Kira, was really good. And I like the forward continuity, how this ties into, the whole Obsidian Order building a fleet with the Tal Shiar to wipe out the Dominion, and as it makes it even more brilliant that they weren't even planning for that, because it fits so perfectly, and again, they don't knock you over the head with it. It's just something that you can put together yourself. I love that sort of thing. So anyway, that is it for my review of Defiant. I shall be back with more Star Trek episode reviews, and eventually, maybe a couple months, but don't you worry, eventually I will get around to reviewing the Muse, so keep an eye out on that. Also, check out my channel as I cover many other shows like The Expanse and more, so be sure to subscribe so you can keep up with all of that, and thanks a lot for watching.